All right, everyone, can you see the first page of my presentation? All right, thank you. So what I want to talk about is this idea that we're floating of a 2022 discussion series, primarily for the first half of the year. And this is captured under item 11 in your agenda. So I want to start kind of by dropping back. I talked a little earlier about some of the work of SRTC, but again, for new members and as I continue to get to know the board, I just want to share a little history about MPOs or Metropolitan Planning Organizations. And so if you think back to the 50s or you know something a little bit about a history, if you can't think back that far, in this post-World War II period, the economy was changing here in the United States. It was very strong. A lot of families were moving out into the suburbs. Auto ownership was going up. And the transportation system was changing pretty significantly. So counties and cities were not necessarily talking to each other, but they were starting to impact each other. We had Eisenhower implementing the ambitious construction of an interstate system. And it was recognized too that there wasn't a good mechanism, not only for locals to communicate with each other, but different agencies to communicate, and then local government to communicate with state and federal government. And so this concept of an MPO was born. And that was to go ahead and create an entity that would ensure that 3C process that you've heard a couple of times today already: continuing, cooperative, and comprehensive. So continuing, that's this board. We're meeting every month, not meeting every now and then, not meeting only when we have a problem. We're meeting regularly. We're bringing a lot of different diverse voices to the table to share information and to try to identify cooperatively what our needs are and what our future will look like. And it's comprehensive. We're talking about transit. We're talking about active transportation, as well as freight and roads. So again, the key to an MPO is that there are locally elected officials that have input in how we're going to spend federal funds. So when we think about an MPO, there's activities that we are required to accomplish, and then there are activities that are optional. It just depends on what a particular region might need. So here on the left, you see our long-range plan, the Horizon 2045 that we've talked about. That goes out 20 years into the future. A transportation improvement program we talked about a couple of times. That is that 4-year program of projects, which we're now starting to pull information and projects out of our long-range plan as funding becomes available. And those should be our highest priority projects. We have a work program that governs what we do. If you're not at least aware that it exists, it's a 2-year program of our budget and how we're going to spend our time and the programs and activities that we're going to do. But then there's this whole variety, which is sometimes a more interesting part of the conversation. And that's what we can do. How do we want to spend our time? How do you want us to spend our time? Bringing data forward to inform decisions, more public outreach, community awareness or safety awareness in the community, helping you develop grants. There's options. They're not without bounds, but they're options. I want to take a minute to just talk about MPOs and the real power of an MPO, because most of what we do is informing and influencing, but we do have two powers: the power to say yes and the power to say no. And so the power to say yes is what we do when we create these project priority lists. We say, these are the things that we need. These are the projects that will help us build the future we're looking for. And we're going to start directing funding that we're available to direct towards these projects. And we put them into our TIP. That's our yes. Our no is if we have a problem, or excuse me, a project that we don't think is good for this area. And I don't know if you all have encountered this. Certainly in my past, we had a project that was an earmark from a congressman that local government did not want to pursue. And we just didn't put that into our tip, and the project didn't advance. So those are the two real powers that an MPO has. I mentioned our planning activities, but identifying projects and figuring out how to get them funded is really one of the most engaging part of what we do. And at the end of last year, this board took 2 actions to try and again, create these statements and move and advance certain projects. And the first one was this transportation funding priority statement. And there were 3 statements that the board approved, but I'll boil them down to really 2 concepts. The one concept was, let's finish what we've started. Between connecting Washington and the North Spokane corridor and other projects, as well as the other packages that were being kicked around at the state level, the board was saying, look, we've invested in a number of projects and we want to be able to bring them across the finish line and get them funded. So those were some of the priorities there. And then the other was maintenance and preservation. And we want to have an increase in the set aside or the funding that's allocated to make sure that we maintain the system that we already have. As Mike Gribner pointed out earlier, this is the system that our current economy, which is quite strong, is built on. And while we are concerned about keeping up with new growth, we don't want to do that at the expense of our existing system. And so that was important to this board. And we adopted these statements in September of last year. We went on from that to develop a unified regional list of transportation priorities. And we did that following this pipeline approach, which was, as projects develop, they start in a more conceptual state. They're in a planning study, different activities that are going on, public outreach, ideas are being thrown together. And then they start to really take form as they move along, and we start actually designing and inquiring right of way for those projects. And then the third and final stage is when we're finishing up the right of way acquisition if it's necessary, and we're looking to fund construction. And by the time that point has been reached, there's significant funding already invested in these projects. So again, that is very consistent with the policy statements that had been adopted, which is, let's finish what we've started. Halfway is not good. And so the first page, what you kind of see in the screen capture here, are the projects that are closer to being built. And this process started with a grouping of projects that was maybe 45, 50 projects long. And we're trying to narrow that focus, again, so that we can really, as an organization, put our attention behind these projects and whatever support we can provide to the particular sponsors that are trying to get them done. So we did that and we went through that effort, but as we've talked about already, the amount of data and work behind some of that to get to that point is perhaps not as robust as it could be. And so what we're trying to do is build on this good work that has already been done in identifying those priorities, and then continue to figure out how best to support and advocate those projects. So we want to continue identifying needs on our transportation system. We want to address freight safety, the different areas that are important to us, and we want to figure out how to better prioritize those projects and get the data that'll back up and make the case, which will make us more competitive in the grant programs for discretionary funding, as well as when we're speaking with our legislators and folks that can help direct funding. So what you see here in this in these bright bubbles Those are the screening criteria that we had used for the unified list. And those categories, if you will, or project attributes, they're consistent with work that's been done by this board. They're also consistent with statutory requirements and policy goals for transportation that exist here in the state of Washington. And so my recommendation is that we move forward with a series of discussions where we really delve into some of the detail. We understand the mindset of the board. We can bring information forward and have a much more sort of detailed conversation about these attributes, how we measure some of these, so that we can screen projects a little more fully in the future, and that we do that in the context of what we have to do, as well as what we want to do for this area. Now, this is a good example of what we have to do. I know this is a lot of words, but these are the planning factors that are written into federal law that an MPO has to consider. And a lot of these, economic vitality, safety and security, connectivity, these are the attributes that we've already named here. There are a few that we'll want to consider that we haven't quite named, but we know are important: resiliency and reliability, travel and tourism. How much impact some of these have on our area, again, I think is open for our discussion. But then there's the really good part of the conversation, which is, but what do we want to do? What do we want to be as an organization? And how do you utilize the staff here at SRTC to really help tease out the issues that we're facing in this region, to bring forward information that you need to make good, strong, informed decisions? What are those topics? And we're going to go through, again, a series of discussions, and hopefully, excuse me, these will be more interactive, where we can really get, again, your thoughts and opinions on some of these issues, so that as we start looking forward, we'll bring information on technology. You heard from Glenn earlier, and the TMC and technology that's coming out in transportation that really should help us get more out of our existing system. So we want to bring in some speakers in some cases to talk about that, talking about the connection between land use and transportation, and the pros and cons of different decisions. So again, over the course of the year, now through August, we're going to roll out a series of conversations. The next month will be quality of life. And in the end, sometime after the August break that I hear we get to take, what we'd like to do is ultimately improve our ability to identify and advance the most important projects that will help support this region into the future. So that's what I have for you today about an MPO and about what we plan to do with this discussion series. I'm happy to take any questions that you might have. And if you don't have any questions, I am certainly open anytime if you have some ideas or you have some questions or thoughts about the material that we bring forward.
Very good. Thank you, Lois. Any thoughts, comments, questions, board members? We can always look forward to more information and discussion.
Mr. Chair, I would just throw on the table, I'm actually looking forward to some of this, Lois. So I appreciate that you're putting together some training. We are entering into unprecedented times in terms of how we are thinking about and need to navigate transportation and land use. So I think it will be certainly great education for all of us, and hopefully we can deploy that into our decision making. So thank you for that.
Very good, thank you.
Yeah, I just want to echo Mr. Gribner's comments too. I'm really looking forward to these discussions. I think, especially with my work at the state level, where we're looking at some very high level policy considerations and technology, and thinking about the way in which we are going to utilize our system in the future. we need to be much more focused on some areas that we probably haven't been as focused on in the past, because the system will be utilized differently. The needs of the system will be different. And we have to think about this, you know, generationally ahead, not necessarily just what we're facing in the immediate future. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying we do not have immediate needs that we need to address and we need to attend to, but we also have to be a little more forward thinking, because these are long-term investments that we're going to be making. And as we all know, once we have them, we want to keep them and maintain them, but utilize them to their fullest efficiency. Because we all know these are expensive investments, and we're not going to be able necessarily to, you know, continue on the same path. So I just appreciate this discussion. I really am looking forward to these and hearing from my fellow board members how they and their jurisdictions are looking at it, how they personally, and from community members' perspectives, how they're looking at it. So thank you for bringing this forward.
Very good. Anybody else?
Mr. Chair, just to follow up on that, just so everyone here is clear, we will also be bringing these discussions to our technical advisory committee as well as our TTC, so that we're hearing from them as well.
Well, I think your ideas are well received, Lois. Do we have any other comments? Any other? Doing none. Thank you, Ms. Fukai, Mr. Gribner, for your input on that one. If there's nothing further, we'll move on to item number 12, and that's our calendar year 2021 quarterly budget update.